take the front mic. The room is yours. He's going to give us his presentation, his thoughts, whatever. We're going to have a bunch of Q&A after, and let's be very respectful, and at the same time, let's enjoy our guest speaker this afternoon. Scott, thank you very much.
Does that come off, or should I leave it on?
Can I take it off? Just squeeze it. There you go. Pay attention.
Perfect. Thank you very much for that very warm welcome. Bob called my office and said, Scott, we'd like the minority leader to come speak. And I said, Bob, now you're not getting me confused, are you? You're not talking about the minority leader in Washington. You're asking Nancy Pelosi to come speak. He said, no, sir, I know exactly who I'm asking for. I want you to come speak. I said, okay, great, Bob, I'll be here. And this is my second time to come out to speak to the High Noon Club, and I appreciate the opportunity. Although, Bob kind of pulled one over on me. The last time I came, I was here, and I had Representative Nelson was with me, and Senator Jolly, and maybe Lewis Moore, I believe, was here the last time. We were talking about school issues and all that kind of stuff. And I appreciate that because I remember the questions that were asked, and sometimes there's some pretty pointed, direct questions. And as a politician, I love being able to look at the person next to me and go, well, why don't you take that question? So I assumed that I'd have, sort of a fall guy like Paul Wesselhoff or Mike Reynolds or Mike Turner's in the back. No, I have no fall guy. So you can ask me all the tough questions you want, and I've got no place to turn. I've got to answer them. So I'm glad to do that. But no, it really is an honor to be here. And Bob's right. As a Democrat, as a minority leader in Oklahoma House of Representatives, some people go, well, why are you going to the High Noon Club? Why would you go out there? Most of them are conservative Republicans. Why would you do that? Multiple reasons. One, I think you and I have more in common than maybe you otherwise would know. When it comes to the issue that you probably care about the most, I would say those of you who come out here and partake of this incredible facility, I'm proud to be an NRA member and an ORA member, and the Second Amendment Association gave me a fantastic award in the last couple of years, and so I'm proud of that. I share your respect and understanding of the Second Amendment and think that we as Americans have that fundamental right, and I'm proud that we live by that and protect that in Oklahoma. So I want you all to know we share common ground there. But the second reason is this. To Bob's point, when we're out at the state capitol, there are 101 of us on the House side. There are 29 Democrats, 72 Republicans. And I promise you, if you had an issue that you really, really cared about, going in and finding 72 Republicans to circle the wagons with and say, we're going to go with, that's pretty tough to do, right? Ask Representative Reynolds, right? Ask Representative Wesselhoff. Try to get their own team to say, let's make this happen. And so that's what we've done. What I've done as minority leader, anytime I could find a way to build a coalition in the House of Representatives. That's what I try to do. Because even though on the specific issue, and we can get into some of those in a little bit, even though on the specific issues you and I may not necessarily agree, the process by which those issues are heard, whether they're given a hearing in committee, whether they're given an opportunity to be heard on the floor, whether we can even debate them or discuss them on the floor, that process is just as important to me as it is to you. But unfortunately, what happens all too often is we get there and those folks in power, and I'll be honest with you, when my team ran the show, they were just as bad or worse. So I'm not trying to come here and be sanctimonious and say that Democrats have always got the answer, because the Democrats, when they ran the show, were just as bad. But the difference is, and this is, it's sort of poignant, and it's the interesting timing. Representative Odilia Dank is a friend of mine. Representative David Dank is a friend of mine. And of course, so you all know that Representative Dank passed away. Odilia did, which is sad. And I know that Representative Dank is struggling with that. It's a difficult time for him. But one of the things that Odilia stood for was openness and transparency in government. She fought like crazy against the Democratic majority to say, no, you know what? Simple things like you ought to have 24 hours just to read a bill or an amendment. It just makes sense, right? That was Odilia hung her hat on that and fought tooth and nail for that process. And then when the Republicans took control, eventually they got around to instituting those types of policies because they were important. However, we now live in a world where even though those ideals that Odilia fought for are technically on paper, they don't always necessarily get lived up to by this current Republican majority. And so when Representative Reynolds has an amendment and they try to shut him down and don't let him talk, or Representative Wesselhoff, or myself, or any of my members, Richard Morissette, who Richard and Mike couldn't be farther from each other on the political spectrum, I promise you that. But I do know how, if we ever get into tough economic times, I figured it out. I've got a solution. We're going to build a big cage, and we're going to put Morissette and Reynolds in it and let you guys fight. We'll sell tickets and make millions. It'll be great. Big cage match. Big cage match. It'll be great. But no, when those amendments come up, and you watch what I believe to be a heavy-handed majority say, no, it doesn't fit what we want, So we're going to silence even our own members, and especially the minority, because when you think of the minority in Oklahoma, most folks think of Democrats. But in many ways, the people in this room are the minority in the state of Oklahoma.
Right.
And so your rights and your beliefs get trampled on by those folks that you put your check mark next to. And so what I care about, and what Bob and I have talked about when he came out and we were trying to get some Second Amendment legislation passed several years ago, he sat down in my office. We visited multiple times, built a great friendship and a relationship. And he said, "Can you help us out?" And I said, "You bet I can." I agreed with Bob on the issue. Like the issue itself, he and I would have voted for it, and I eventually did. We agreed on the issue, without a doubt. But I had members in my caucus who didn't agree. They didn't agree with what Bob was trying to do, what you all were trying to do on that Second Amendment issue. They disagreed with the actual text of the bill. But they also disagreed with the process that was being used to silence that legislation. And so Bob and I built a friendship, and we went out and built a coalition and said, "You know what, I'll do my best to get all of my Democrats on board. Get them to sign a sign-out petition, do what we got to do." Even though they may disagree with the bill itself, none of them want to be treated that way when they have legislation that's important to them. And so we built a coalition and did all we could to make that happen. And hopefully going forward, we'll be able to do that. So that's the second reason I'm here, is to say that even though we may disagree on the issues, I fundamentally believe that if you've got something important enough to take to the legislature, and you've got a state representative who's willing to file that bill and put his or her name on it for you, then they have just as much right to get that bill heard in committee, just as much right to get an up or down vote on it as anybody else does, no matter what party affiliation they have beside them. And anybody who's not willing to stand up and say, "You know what, let's give you a voice," in my opinion, is being a coward. Because at the end of the day, if you just can't vote up or down on an issue, then why are you there? Why did you put your name on the ballot? If you can't vote against a gun issue, if you're too terrified to vote against a gun issue, then you don't deserve to be there. If you're too terrified to vote against a school funding issue, then you don't belong to be there. And so hopefully we can continue to build those kind of relationships going forward, and hopefully my team, understanding that openness and transparency in government is just as important to me as it is to you, will continue to try to build those relationships moving forward. So with that sort of the overarching theme as to why I'm here, I would love to take questions. Before I do, I want to make one comment. Representative Wesseloff and maybe soon to be Senator Kern, I'm not sure he's got a ways to go, right? But nevertheless, we were visiting over here, and I hope that you all share my opinion. Whatever you think of Governor Fallin, I'm not here to disparage Governor Fallin, but decisions can be disparaged and decisions can be disagreed with. I think the decision to spend between $150,000 to $300,000 on a special session for special interest legislation in September is a poor, poor decision.
Amen.
There is nothing pressing. There's no budget hole that we got to come in and fill. There's nothing that nobody's going to die. No lives are on the line. That we have to come back in now and spend your tax dollars to get this done. Those of you who care about public safety, and I'm a big public safety guy, we fought like crazy to get a little more money into DPS so we can hire some more state troopers. They're significantly underfunded, right? We fought like crazy to get some more money for state troopers. And they said, "No, we can't do it. Can't find it. We're not going to give you any money for that." But yet we can spend $300,000 on a special session, which on average would give us 6 or 7 new state troopers, depending upon how you work this out. We can't give money for state troopers, but we can find money to come in and run special legislation. To me, that, I don't have much hair left, but what little I have, I pull out when I hear ridiculous arguments. That's true. I really get frustrated with it. And so my team's upset by it. We voiced that. We'll be putting out some different press releases trying to push the governor to make wise decisions. And then what you're going to see, not only are we going to spend that money, because it's done, the decision's made, right? That thing is baked in. We're going to spend that money, whether you like it or not. But the second thing that you're going to see is you're going to see a group of folks come out there and say, "Yeah, we're going to spend your tax dollars to do this special interest, special legislation. But we're also going to do it in a way that is the least transparent way we possibly can." Okay? When that bill was passed several years ago, that bill in 2009, when Governor Henry was in the governor's mansion, you had the state chamber, you had trial lawyers, you had legislators on both sides, you had the speaker pro tem, you had all these groups of people together working months on this legislation, trying to strike some sort of compromise, which I think is the way legislation is supposed to be done. You work it all out. You allow the process to go through. I sit on the Judiciary Committee. It went through our Judiciary Committee twice. It went through one way, and it came back into the Senate, and we saw it again. And then it came through a conference committee. So I actually got to see it 3 times. I saw that legislation 3 times before it got on the floor and was voted up or down for the final time. So months of negotiation, months of compromise. I had a chance to visit with all kinds of interested parties and say, "Tell me what you think of this legislation." That's how that went. And oh, by the way, it wasn't the first time that we discussed this issue in 2009. We discussed it for years leading up to that, right? So finally we get it done. It was done in a poor way because I think the Supreme Court was right. I think it was log rolling. I mean, 62 sections of law or 66 sections of law in one, that's ridiculous. And the Supreme Court has said over and over again, we have grown weary of telling the legislature to wake up, quit being dumb and sending this legislation that's unconstitutional. So they do all that at the time. They still pack it together and send it on. But that was the openness and transparent process, the legislative process. When we get together in a week, guess what's going to happen? We're going to come in on Tuesday and they're going to gavel in, gavel out. Say, we were here, bill has been first read. Doesn't mean it was read on the floor, doesn't mean it went through committee, nothing. First read, boom, done. We're going to come in on Wednesday, they're going to second read, boom, boom, gavel in, gavel out, and that's it. No discussion, no debate, nothing. Then on Thursday, up to 26 bills, there's probably going to be 13 on our side, maybe 13 or 14 or 15, I don't know how many it's all going to be total. But about 30 bills roughly could come through the process when they get it all worked out. We're going to get told on Thursday, there are the bills, vote on them. They won't go through committee, they won't go through judiciary committee, they won't go through a conference committee. It's a handful of selected group of people who are working all the agreements out, and they're going to throw them on the floor Thursday and say, Representative Inman, Representative Reynolds, Representative Westlaw, vote on them. And when we say, well, wait a minute, don't we have 24 hours to amend the bill? Remember the Odelia Dank thing? We got 24 hours to amend the bill? Oh, no, there's no 24-hour period anymore. Not at all. You don't get to put an amendment on and let everybody read that amendment for 24 hours and decide whether they're going to vote for it. No, there's no 24-hour amendment process at all. Vote on the bill right now. With the hope that nobody will amend it at all. Because they don't want the bill to go to conference committee. They want us to pass it out of the House, send it over to the Senate, have them vote on it once, and go straight to the governor. That's what they want. So we're going to have a ramrodded system, no transparency in a committee process, no 24-hour amendment cycle to go through the legislation and the amendments. None of that. And we're told, just do it. And the Oklahoman, who loves Mike Reynolds as much as they love me, we're close, I tell you, we're really close. But the Oklahoman had the audacity on the editorial page to say, oh, you know what, this is all just boilerplate stuff, we've all done this before, just stamp it. Just get it on through, let's just pass it. That's what they said on the editorial page. Just get it done. We've done this before. We all know what's there. Well, guess what? I believe the numbers, and Marianne can correct me later, I believe the numbers are about 36 members of the legislature, the Oklahoma House. 1/3 of us were never there in 2009. Over 1/3 of the body wasn't there in 2009 to listen to the lobbyists, to listen to the special interest groups, to listen to their constituents, to listen to the committee. They weren't there. But now they're being told, 36 of them. Mike Turner's one of them. Representative Turner's one of them. He wasn't there. He's being told, Mike, take it or leave it. And, hey, if I were there in 2009, I would have had months to ask constituents. Go back home, have a town hall, who knows? And now we haven't even seen the bill. We haven't seen the bill. We're being told in a couple of days, vote on it. I think that's ridiculous. And I've looked at my Republican colleagues who control that body, and I was very sincere with them, and I said, how can you, as a party of supposedly conservative principles, meaning don't waste taxpayer dollars and be as open and transparent as possible, run this process, this sham of a process, at us the day after Labor Day? And there's not much has been said, but I'm frustrated by it, and I hope you are too. And with that, I really will shut up and take questions. Yes, sir.
Let's do this, okay? On our Q&A part, let's stay on the special session first, okay? Before we drift off to other things, because I know that's going to be a lot of questions to ask about that. So if you want to ask a question that diverts from this special session, kind of hold that back.
Do you know the CPA term material?
Sure.
What percent is $150,000 of our state budget?
Well, we got it depends on how you look at it. The general revenue dollars, we spend about $7 billion. $7 billion out of our general revenue fund. The overall state budget is about $16 billion. So whatever percentage of that, $150,000 is $7 billion. So it's small. You're right. You're right. But in my opinion, sir, every tax dollar is important. And if I were to come in and say, you know what, I'm going to put in 3 new toilets at the state capitol, and each toilet's going to cost me $28,000, and you raise Cain over it, and I walk in and say, well, it's just $90,000 out of a $6 billion budget, I'd say that's nothing. You'd lose. You'd blow up at me. So even though $150,000 may be insignificant in the grand scheme of things, you may be right. In my opinion, it's still state tax dollars, and I don't believe they're being spent wisely.
That's right.
Here's what I would say about a question, or answer that question further. Here's my way of thinking. When anybody thinks that $150,000 or $200,000 is not a lot of money, please write the check out to Bob Daney. Because he was very willing to take that check.
Thank you, Scott, for being here. My question is, the log rolling the bill itself had these different issues in there that the Supreme Court said you have to break these down. Is there thinking that all they're going to do is just break it down into individual things and then pass each one as an individual bill, but yet say, okay, we've already done this, it's gone through the process, we're just going to make it legal, constitutional by breaking it down into individual bills instead of one bill? Is that what they're doing?
Exactly. I have talked to, I've talked to some in the Republican leadership, and I've talked to some in the trial lawyer groups who were part of the negotiation years ago. And I said, so you tell me what's going to happen, because even as the minority leader, I said, can I see what's happening, please? Can I see a bill where we're going with this? And no, sorry, it's not ready for consumption yet. We're not ready for public consumption. So I said, okay. What they're going to do, what I have been told, because basically a compromise has more or less been worked out. So you've got the state chamber folks on one side, and you've got the trial lawyers on the other side. Those are the two big fighters whenever you deal with tort reform, right? So those are two big battle combatants. Basically, they've come to an agreement, because they all agreed on the 09 language, what's been challenged. Both sides have basically agreed that if they just break it up, don't change anything about it, so therefore there's no chance for amendments, Mike. If you wanted to do an amendment, the agreement's been cut. No, we can have an amendment. They're going to be told, you got to get on board and vote yes, because no amendments. The compromise has been cut. They've been told if you just vote on it just as it is, break it up into 25 or 30 different bills, just the exact same language that passed in 2009, and we'll run that right through. And that's the promise that the chamber has made or the business folks have made to the trial lawyers, and I think the trial lawyers said, well, okay, if that's what you're going to do, so be it. Which I'm kumbaya, Merry Christmas. That's great that you all worked that out. But the problem is we, the legislators, should have a say on that, because the 37,000 people we represent might have something to say about it.
Yes.
Okay, next question.
I'm Charlie. I know what the answer is going to be because I already talked to you about it. But given that the Constitution requires bills to be of one subject, and we've had the Constitution for a long time, shouldn't the legislature have paid some attention to the Constitution when they passed this legislation? And two, if we then have to come back and redo it, I think everybody ought to do it for free.
In my opinion, because this isn't as pressing an issue as others might think it is, we take that legislation, we bring it back in February, we break it up just like what Steve was talking about, like they're going to do, and we run through the process like Norman, and we let Mike Turner and all the new guys get a chance to look at it and run through the process. That's the way it should work, instead of coming in and making us do it this way. The log rolling thing, yeah, people ought to pay attention. We ought to figure, you'd think we'd know that by now. I mean, Jerry Fenton has, if he hadn't beat us over the head, the Supreme Court has. I mean, he said, listen, people, pay attention. But, in spite of all of the laws that have been overturned because of the log rolling provision, and mind you, this is, as Mr. Potts and I were talking about, this isn't just a state law. I mean, it's not like something that Mike and I voted in 5 years ago because we thought it was a good idea. This is in the Oklahoma State Constitution. This is the constitutional requirement. So you've got legislators who stand up and put their hand over their heart and say, we stand and support the federal Constitution, but then turn around and vote through legislation that violates the Oklahoma State Constitution. That doesn't make any sense. But yet, in spite of all of those challenges and all of those victories by Jerry Fenton and others, we take a bill this year and we roll in a tax cut and $60 or $120 million worth of capital repairs to the state capitol. We're going to fix the building, and we put a tax cut in, and they put them in the same bill together. Well, guess what's going to happen? That bill, in my opinion, is going to get kicked out as log rolling. So if you cared about a tax cut, and I know many people do, you wanted a tax cut. Okay? Maybe you and I disagreed on that issue fundamentally. But if you truly cared about a tax cut, then you should have gone, the speaker, the governor, the pro tem should have said, let's run it all by itself. No need to muck this thing up. Run it out there all by itself, vote on it up or down, and be done with it. But now what's happened is, the tax cut that wasn't going to go into effect for another year or so anyway, the way it was set into law, is going to get challenged, and if it hadn't already, and it's going to get kicked out. And we're going to have to come back and do it again. And the Capitol's not going to get fixed. Those of us who want to see the Capitol fixed, it's not going to get fixed either. We're going to push that on down the road. It's frustrating. So.
Real quick, explain what log rolling actually is for the audience. Just explain that.
No, I mean, the state constitution gives a single subject rule, okay? Not a single issue rule, a single subject rule. The state constitution says that no piece of legislation should deal with more than one subject at a time. And the idea behind that makes perfect sense. For example, using the issue that I just brought up, tax cuts and funding to repair the Capitol. I know full well that in the Republican caucus, there were a lot of folks who didn't want to spend tens of millions of dollars on the state capitol that way, right? I know that. But I also knew most of those folks wanted a tax cut, wanted to pass a tax cut. So what do you do if you're in leadership? You need that, you want that money for the Capitol passed, okay? So what you do is you attach it just like they do in Washington. Washington does it, this is Washington-style politics at its finest, right? They take a farm bill and put food stamps in it, whatever, right? Those two things are separate, I mean, but that's why they do it, so they can get it passed, okay? That's how they do it. Well, that's what they did here, and they log roll it like that so they can get one thing, they can use one leverage point to get something else less popular passed. And the state constitution prohibits that. And they do it not only for us in the legislature, but they also do it for those of us who care about initiative petition process, so that if you were to go, if Representative Reynolds wanted to take an initiative petition around and put something on the ballot, right? Say he wanted to put a Second Amendment issue on the ballot. So he does that, but then they go in and tack on something completely different about school funding, okay? Well, when you go to the polls in November, how do you vote? You really care about the school funding but don't like the gun issue, but maybe you like the gun issue but don't want the school funding. Well, you end up getting it passed because people are having to take it, you got to take it all or leave it, and they don't want to do that, and this prohibits that and protects Oklahoma voters from being forced to make those sort of unfair decisions.
Next question.
Larry, for being here, I've read the opinion from the Supreme Court, and it didn't come out from someone challenging the law. It was a workers' compensation case where there's a distinct new class of people which prevents some people from being able to have access to the courts. And it's been an additional $40 charge. So one of the issues you guys will probably have to address is where's all the money going to be refunded and how are you going to replace it?
That's a legitimate question, and I don't have an answer for you.
But you won't find out until...
We won't even see it until...
Yes, good.
That's right. Odds are most of us may see it the end of next week. If I were a betting man, I'd say maybe the end of next week at the earliest. And oh, by the way, so they'll give it to you and say, go enjoy your Labor Day weekend with your family. Right? You got nothing better to do. Once you read 250 pages over 30 bills and do that so that you got it all figured out in your head before you and enjoy the lake. Anyway, yes, sir.
Next question.
My name's Scott also. Nice to have you.
Good man.
The question I have is this. The Oklahoma Constitution sets up certain ways of doing things during the session. And when they have this special session, there is no rules for it. Is that right?
Pretty much, yeah, that's right.
So we're just voting on stuff that really doesn't need to be taken care of at that time.
Yeah, we're doing it in a way that is anything but transparent and open. That's true, because our House rules, and I don't agree with all the House rules. Mike and I fought together on those issues against some of the way the House rules are set up. But nevertheless, the body voted on a set of House rules that govern a certain process. Well, now that we're in a special session, many of those same House rules don't apply for this special session. The 24-hour requirement and the committee process and all that stuff. They're just throwing it all out.
Do you think it's going to only take a week to do this? Or you going to? Because I've heard other people say that it's going to.
I mean, the way it'll work, and this is what I think will happen. And Mike and Paul and Mike may have different opinions. But the way I think it'll happen, we'll first read on Tuesday, second read on Wednesday. We'll debate about 13 or so bills in the House on Thursday. At the same time, the Senate's doing the exact same thing. We'll send the bills over, swap them on Thursday. So then we can first read Senate bills that same afternoon. So we're done debating House bills. We can first read Senate bills on Thursday. We can come back in and second read them on Friday. And then everybody will come back in on Monday. And we'll do the third reading of all the Senate bills on Monday. And if there are no amendments, if they keep the amendments off the bill, they keep it clean, then we're done on Monday. All the bills will, and the Senate does the same thing. They'll all go to the governor for her signature. If anybody amends anything, then it's a wrench in the system, and we have to go back. We have to go to a conference committee of some sorts. It'll take longer. But I think they're doing their darndest to make sure everybody's on the same page. They got 51 votes to kill every amendment, 51 votes to pass every bill, and if they've got that, then process is going to run pretty smoothly. And I think they'll be done in 5 days. And another point on that too, I scratched my head on why the governor called us the Tuesday after Labor Day. If she would have called us the following Monday, which would have been the 9th, right? So if you follow me, we're coming in on the 3rd on Tuesday, but if she'd have called us in on Monday the 9th, we could have gone Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, 5 days minimum and be done. Well, what that means is for people like Mike, me, and Paul, and Mike Turner, it's not too consequential. But for people like Representative Blackwell who live out in Laverne, or people who like Representative Curtis McDaniel who live in McCurtain County, those guys drive in. their per diem and mileage checks are pretty significant. They get paid a lot. I mean, it's the way the state constitution, state law is set up. But they get a substantial check to come in, right? And a lot of members who live outside Oklahoma City get those per diem and mileage checks. Well, if she would have called us in on Monday the 9th, it would be one per diem and mileage check for the week, because they only get one per week, right? One for the week, and they'd have been done. Would have saved us significant money. But by running it Tuesday to Friday and then making everybody go home, and then come back the following Monday, that's 2 sets of mileage and per diem checks that are going to have to be issued to all the legislators around the state. And it just boggles my mind as to why we do it that way. It's just more money that we don't have to spend.
Question.
Scott, I heard you say that there's no cycle, and I've been reading the rules, and I don't see that. So do you really think there's not an amendment cycle?
Well, I'll share. I think there should be. I talked with the powers that be, parliamentarian, and I said, yeah, I want to know. My members will want to know how this process is going to work. And I was told then that his interpretation of the State House was that there is no 24-hour amendment cycle. And so what that means is, even if you and I think there is, if we challenge that ruling, he's going to sit there and whisper into the speaker's ear, and the speaker's going to make a decision that you and I are wrong. So there will be no 24-hour amendment.
Question.
Hi, I'm Cindy. These 30-some bills that they're going to give you guys and really force you to just sign them, constitutional representatives, and will you vote no on all of them? Is that the right thing to do?
Well, I mean, and that's a tough one, because I don't want to speak for all the legislators in the room. There are parts of that legislation that I may fundamentally disagree with. So I'll be voting no because I disagree with the process. Or not just the process, but with the bill itself, right? But there are other parts. I know Representative Reynolds and Wessel Lofton Turner, I know they agree with those. If you laid all 30 of them out, I may agree with half of them. They may agree with 25 of the 30. Okay. So I don't want to come in and say, well, then Paul needs to take a stand and vote no on the bill, because for his constituents sent him up there. He made a pledge to them that when it came to issues of tort reform, he would vote for certain things. Well, for him to vote no on that in protest may be not only unfair to Paul, but it's probably unfair to his constituents. And so I wouldn't ask him to do that. What you'll hear me say, and what you'll hear me argue on the House floor, and to Paul, so you'll hear, this is a little mini debate that you're going to get a preview of. So what you're going to hear me say is, vote however you want on the bill, on the merits of the bill. We're here now, we couldn't do anything about it. So we're here, vote however you want on the merits of the bill. If you like the merit of the bill, then vote for it. But there's an emergency clause in the bill. There will be an emergency clause on every one of them. And that emergency clause, if it's passed, requires 68 votes. If that emergency clause is passed, it goes into effect immediately in September. If it doesn't, it goes into effect in December. And so what I'm going to ask members to do is stand up and say, you know what, in your little way to protest is, if we truly believe this is an emergency, that we didn't have to be here to spend this kind of money, the way you send the message to Governor Fallon and legislative leaders is you vote no on that emergency clause, and you say, you know what, I'll vote for your bill. I don't want the bill to die, okay, because I may support the merits. But I'm voting no on that emergency clause to send a message that spending $150,000 or $300,000 this way at this time just isn't a dadgum emergency. And that's what I'm going to encourage members to do. So, whether they'll do it or not, I don't know.
Next question.
My name's Jim, and I've been sober since August 1st. Wrong meeting, I'm sorry. I'd like to go back to your background, where you're from, education, why you're a Democrat, not with us.
Well, that's all right. I appreciate that. Now, I was born and raised in Del City. Matter of fact, my mother and dad were born and raised in Del City. My grandfathers were both Army Air Corps veterans and then went into the Air Force after World War II. So they were there in Army Air Corps in World War II. And then they kind of moved around. They're both from Missouri, rural Missouri. And then they both came because of Tinker Air Force Base. And that's how my family got here. Matter of fact, my mother and dad went to the same Catholic church in Del City that they go to today. And both of my grandmothers were presidents of the ladies group at different times, right? You asked how I got here. I'm telling you how I got here. So they were both presidents of the ladies group at different times, and so they were really close. And I kid you not, my dad was going to college at Rose State, or Oscar Rose at the time, and he was dating a woman that my grandmother, now mind you, she's 92, just turned 92 in July. She's about 4'10", 4'11", little Puerto Rican Spitfire. She's born in Puerto Rico, been in the United States now for 70 years, but she's born in Puerto Rico, okay? And little Spitfire. Well, she was not real pleased with who my dad was dating at the time. Okay? Just to put it mildly, she did not like the lady he was dating. So she called up my other grandmother and said, Jean, is Carolyn dating anybody? I said, no. I said, well, would she mind dating Johnny? And so sure enough, that's how so they got together, and then I came, and here I am. And so I was born and raised in Del City. My wife she wasn't born in Del City. She was born in Texas. We prayed for her. But nevertheless, she got to Oklahoma as fast as she could, and she's been here. She graduated from Del City High School, and we've been together now for 7.5 years. We've got 2 little girls, 5 and 2, Ella and Sophia. They're incredible. I went to graduate Del City High School, went to OU undergrad, OU Law School, and then practiced law for a little bit, doing insurance stuff with a firm downtown Oklahoma City, and then ran for state house and got elected. Why I'm a Democrat? There are a variety of reasons that we could get into, I guess, but part of it is, as with a lot of folks, I mean, I studied political science when I was in college. That was what my degree was in, so I had to go to law school or else I couldn't eat, because you can't do anything with a political science degree. But it's true, try it sometime. It's not good, it's not fun. But so growing up, I grew up in a household. Grandparents were Democrats. My grandfather was an old union member at General Motors, and that's just kind of how it was growing up. And so you kind of, although we didn't talk politics much in the house, but that was just kind of upbringing where we came from, and I've sort of been that way ever since, right or wrong. And if you look at me, I talked about my Second Amendment votes. You can go ask the Oklahomans for life. Matter of fact, the guy I replaced, Kevin Calvin, he's come to me, written me really nice letters, because I have a 100% pro-life voting record at the state capitol since I've been there. So no, I get people all the time saying, well, why are you? And I say this, if I were in another state, I would probably be something different, right? Probably so, because you go to the coast, and if I were in California or Massachusetts, they probably would just excommunicate me, right? That's probably what they would do. But I'm in Oklahoma, and most Oklahomans, I think most Oklahomans are somewhere in the middle. You know what I mean? They're relatively conservative on a variety of issues, and so I feel like I fit well with my community at Del City, and so I is what I is, I guess. So anyway.
But didn't you run for the Senate one time too?
I did. I made a poor decision and thought I would be a better senator than Mike Reynolds' brother. And the constituents of my beautiful district told me otherwise. They said, "No, sir, we're happy with our current representation. You go back and practice law." And so I did. So. Thank you, Mike. I appreciate that. Just rip the scab off.
And believe me, I kind of know that feeling. It's okay.
Okay, I'm going to ask a hard question. The governor, Steve, the governor is willing to do something here that seems to be very unpopular. Obviously, there's pressure from somewhere that basically is saying, we've got to do this, we've got to get this done now, rather than waiting. Okay, where's that pressure coming from? What is the reasoning behind the idea that we have to do this now? There's got to be some kind of something coming from somewhere that's saying, we need to do this even if it's not popular, and I really feel like the governor's kind of put herself out there by doing this, so there's got to be something coming from somewhere.
Steve, you're right. You and I, you and I think a lot alike. That's dangerous for you and for me both. Don't tell anybody. You and I are on the same page when it comes to that issue. And I use this. I talked to the floor leader, matter of fact, a couple days ago, and I looked her square in the eye and I said, Pam, I don't understand. I said, all last summer and fall, all we heard in the newspaper and everywhere else was Senator Bingham saying we have to do workers' compensation reform. Got to do it. It's fine. Businesses are suffering. And I had this. Matter of fact, we were just in Del City at a flower shop, and they were asking me about comp rates and say, what's going on? Y'all passed this, but my rate's still went up by $1,200, and I got 3 employees or whatever. She's struggling. Right? Small family business. But I heard a lot of that. And I looked at her and I said, Pam, that's all we talked about. Bingham said it was vitally important that we pass comp reform. Businesses were leaving the state, and we've got evidence of that. You can go back up to Ponca City and other places, and businesses that actually picked up and left the state because of comp rates. I said, but if all of that was so dadgum important and vital, and I actually heard businesses come to me and say, this is important, how come nobody called a special session for comp reform last year? How come? Bingham said, we'll just wait and handle it through the legislative process and get it done. But here we are, all of a sudden, we got to do this now. For what? I don't know. I'm with you. There's someone, someplace, my conspiracy theory brain said, or maybe that's Richard Moore said, just chirping in my ear. He thinks there's a black elephant. He's something else. But anyway, he said, Richard, he came to my office the other day, just blowing. It's like Richard does, right? Just comes blowing, and you can hear him coming down the thing. And there's got to be somebody somewhere. Somebody's got to. We got to look at who. Follow the trail. Where's the money? Who's somebody? I go, well, there probably is somebody, Richard. But I got, I'm trying, but you go figure it out, Richard. Don't stick it on me. He's good about that. You know what? You ought to do this. Well, why me? Why not you? But no, I believe there is someone, someplace. You got to be some extra pressure. Because why would the governor, knowing what I said earlier, small C conservative, lower taxes, and don't waste money, why does she doesn't need this hickey now. She's got a 71% approval rating. She's well respected and liked. She's doing fine. Why does she need to put her name? All she got to do is say, tell whoever it is, give me 4 months. We'll run it through then. We'll pass it in a session. We'll take care of you. And my argument, and they say, well, we got to do it now because we got to have a stable environment. People got to know what. And I go, well, in 2009 was when this law was passed. Okay, statehood was from 1907 to 2009. He said Larry Nichols and a whole bunch of really, really wealthy businesses did just fine getting where they got before this law was passed, okay? Before it ever was on the books. So I can't imagine that just now for the next 4 months, everybody, it's all going to go to hell in a handbasket over this constitutional ruling. I just don't buy it. So I don't know why, but I'm with you. I think there's got to be some special interest pushing something.
What is Mike think?
Yeah, it's not about what Mike thinks right now. The question would be, what do you actually think of the State Chamber of Commerce? Where are you at on their?
No, I mean, I think I've got great relationships at different levels of the state chamber and the local chamber. The Del State Chamber of Commerce and my community are terrific people. And I have a good working relationship with the Chamber of Commerce, but just as in any organization like that, you got to be very, very careful when you have some very powerful, wealthy individuals who support, who write the check. As with any place, you tend to try to do the business and the bidding of those folks who write the check. And I would be concerned about some of their priorities. Their priorities don't always line up with mine or many of you in this room. They'll argue that it's to improve business in Oklahoma, and I think that at some point, and I've said this to other folks before, Senator Coburn and I are night and day different on a whole lot of issues, but when it comes to some of these tax credit issues, when Coburn says we ought to get out of the business of giving away money, picking winners and losers, I think he couldn't be more correct. And so what you have is you have a crowd that's pushing it.
Next question.
My name is Don. Thank you very much for being here. What are the names and the positions of the people that are ramming this down your throat?
I mean, the decision was made by the 3 top leaders in the state. I mean, Governor Fallon made the decision. I know she spoke with Speaker Shannon. She had to speak with Senator Bingaman to make sure that they had the votes to do it. And then all the disciples kind of fall in line. I mean, I met with several folks and just in the last few days at the Capitol. I'd kind of pull them aside and go, what in the world are you doing? Now, I get some people like Paul and Mike that go, well, this is bad, we're not for this deal. But other folks, they're team players. I mean, I had one member, and I don't want to get into all the names because, anyway, we can talk afterwards, I guess. But I had one member who normally would be on your team. Normally on your team. And I thought for sure this member would agree with me and you guys and say this is a bad deal. It's amazing. Circle the wagons. Oh no, this is important. Why? We got to send the Supreme Court a message. His words, not mine. And I thought, what? You can send them a letter if you want to send them a message. You ain't got to waste $150,000. And oh, by the way, the last time I checked, the Supreme Court keeps kicking all of our junk back at us. They're the ones sending a message to us. They're not worried about us. Are you kidding me? That was we had to send the Supreme Court a message. And if we did it in January and February, that's not fast enough. That's not sending the message. And I said, they're not going to lose any sleep over. We come in here and do this. What they're going to see is they listen that we listened to them, split the bill up, and did it the right way. They're going to look at it as a victory for them, not us somehow thumbing our nose at them. It's frustrating.
Okay, let me go up here and then we'll go to the back.
I'm just saying, Scott, if we want to send the Supreme Court a message, let's pass a bill on term limits for judges.
Well, you can do that too. But to that point, Paul, I think the Supreme Court got it right here. I mean, so it's like, if we did that, thumbing our nose at them, honestly, I think it was long rolling. I think a lot of it was long rolling. So in that sense, if I was the Supreme Court, I'd look back and go, well, who are the authors of that bill? Maybe they're the ones that need to go home, not us. But anyway, I'm with you, Paul.
Be very careful in your answer after this question. That's the rifle.
That's right.
Let me introduce you to the rifle and your first name.
Chuck Connors, right? Chuck
Connors. Scott, thanks for coming. I just want to make one little correction to something that you mentioned, and that has to do with calling of the special sessions.
Okay.
The governor can call a special session all on her own. She doesn't need any agreement between the Speaker of the House or the Senate Pro Tem. She can go all by herself. No. Now, if the legislature wants to call a special session, it takes 2/3 of each house to do that.
No, you're right, but my point there was, when the question was asked, who's doing this, who's making us do it this way? Certainly Fallon made the decision, had the complete authority constitutionally to call us back in, and that's what she's done. But going back to what I said earlier about making sure the bills don't get amended, making sure it runs through the process smoothly so they don't take any more than 5 or 6 days, that was important to her because she's already going to take a hickey for it. If it went on 2 weeks, it's going to look even worse for her. So I think what she did is she went in and made sure that the teams could get her the votes she needed in an efficient, expedient manner. So yes, you're 100% right. This is completely Fallon's decision to call us in, but I do think she consulted with the leaders to make sure the votes were right.
Anybody else have a question on special session? Okay. Go ahead. Okay, just hang on now.
He's a libertarian.
Your name, sir.
David, how much you know I'm going to receive for this special, in pay?
Sure.
And since you're saying that a lot of rules are being suspended, technically you guys could go on for reservation and deal with the Second Amendment or something, right?
Well, you will see many members, and I don't know what Representative Reynolds or Representative Westlaw have planned, but you'll see members of our caucus who will say, well, fine, if we're just going to throw the rule book out, well, then why not discuss this issue or that issue? I mean, because everybody's got their own projects that think that, in their hometown or their district, these are emergencies to them. And so, our argument is well, the governor, this is important to the governor, so be it. But these are also important to our constituents. Let's discuss those too. So there will be a push made by many members, I would bet, to try to bring certain issues up. Now, I can tell you now, none of those issues are going to go anywhere. It'll be shot down, move to table, those will be shot down. And how much money? It's just whatever the normal rate is. So what is the per diem rate? I think those folks who live more than 60 miles outside, if they come in, it's like $150 a day, I think is what the per diem is for food and lodging. I think that's right. And then whatever it is per mile, however many cents per mile. So it all depends on where you're coming from. So when you're coming from Smithville, McCurtain County, it's a 4-hour drive. That mileage check can get pretty substantial.
So you don't receive extra money?
No.
For coming in here?
No, there's the salary. Yeah, we don't get any extra salary, but the costs come in by paying staff, but bringing in extra staff if they have to do that, and by paying all the per diem rates and all the travel rates and all that kind of stuff, and to operate the system. That's where the extra costs come in for both chambers.
Question.
Okay, I'm Sandra. Who's writing these bills? Who's putting the words on the paper? Do they not know what they're doing? Who supervises them and tells them what to do?
Well,
why do they keep getting
yes,
kicked
ma'am.
back if these people are supposed to know what they're doing?
Absolutely. Who writes the bills is an interesting question. Technically speaking, we have legal staff downstairs, a staff of nice people, nice attorneys who draft stuff up. If Representative Reynolds calls down and says, I want a bill that deals with X, Y, and Z, and here's what I want to say, they'll draft it up for them. So they'll write it, okay? All too often, though, these types of bills don't come from folks downstairs. These types of bills come from a set of lobbyists who come in with a big stack of bills that are already written. And they'll hand them to a certain member, whoever the author is, and say, would you please take those downstairs and have them recreate that on our proper letterhead and run it that way. So they're the ones that are writing the bills. And so, all too often, yeah.
Because they don't know what they're doing.
Well, no, I think they do know what they're doing.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And they know exactly what they're doing. They know how to get their legislation done to take care of their clients and their special interests. They've got that down to a science. They absolutely know what they're doing. Now, do they know that they're violating the Constitution? Probably so. And all they're hoping for, and I think I mentioned this to Mr. Potts, all they're hoping for is that this will be the one that Jerry Fent doesn't challenge. You know? What you got? It's just kind of a gamble. They're going, well, we know it's unconstitutional, but remember, it's only unconstitutional if the Supreme Court says it is, right? And if nobody challenges it, then technically speaking, it's going to be considered constitutional, right? And so that's what they're going to do. They just keep their fingers crossed and nobody raises an issue.
Yeah, I think that one thing we need to always think about is don't ever think that people down at the Capitol do not do stuff purposefully. Okay? Everything is done purposefully. And to think that they're stupid or they don't know what they're doing or any of the other kind of name calling, you're far off base here, okay? You're just not as deviant maybe as some of the ideas of what they're attempting to do. And he didn't say that, I said that, okay? And anybody that's been at the Capitol, been around the Capitol, you can instantly recognize that. So what a great thing for most people to do, as I say, go visit the Capitol. Watch them. Go sit up at the gallery. See who's really working before, who's doing these different little deals. So again, don't ever think that they did not know what they're purposely doing, okay? That was very purposely done for a reason, okay? Now, any other questions regarding special session? I'd like you to kind of tell us a little bit about bonds and some of the tax credits. Let's talk about that kind of thing.
Absolutely.
And if you really wouldn't mind, I mean, I'd kind of like to set you up with Indian culture center. Let's just talk about that one first. Okay? That's a good one.
I don't mind at all, Bob. Let's talk about that. So the 800-pound gorilla in Oklahoma City. Let's talk about that issue. Thanks, Bob. I'll write you a thank you note later. Bonds. I want to talk about bonds, taxes, and fees as they all relate to one another. I want to talk about that first. Because what we're seeing happening at the state capitol is we've got a group of folks, in my opinion, that are doing their best to sell an idea that they're trying to lower the cost of government for you and trying to lower your individual cost of government. In other words, reduce your taxes, right? So that's the argument, is we're going to reduce your taxes. And that discussion has merit, absolutely has merit. However, what's happening, and what I believe is happening, is you have a group of folks who stand up and say, it's really easy to get reelected by saying, I cut your taxes. And it's really easy to understand, it's a big headline in the newspaper when it happens. But then they turn around when you're not looking, and they raise fees on hunting licenses and car tags, and raise fees to the tunes of hundreds of thousands, millions of dollars. Millions, okay? So they're cutting taxes on one end and making you think, hey, that's great, look, they care about me. I don't have to pay as much in income tax now. But what if you're a retired senior citizen? Don't have a job. You're not paying much in income taxes anyway. Most of you aren't, right? Living off Social Security, a little bit of retirement. Well, that income tax didn't hurt you didn't help you very much. But when you go get your car tag, or you go get your hunting license, and now you're paying $100 more, $50 more, well, that's gone. I mean, that's where it gets you. And so you've got this issue now of folks who say they want to shrink government, and they want to do so by cutting taxes. And so they cut taxes. But instead of getting the shrinking government part, they come over and raise fees so that government can continue to grow, and they decide they want to just tack on, I don't know, several $1 billion worth of bond issues, pushing the state further into debt, so that way they don't have to use general revenue dollars, they don't have to raise your taxes to pay for things, they'll just put it out over a 30-year note and drive up crazy, ridiculous amounts of interest and make you pay for projects that way. And so, in that sense, to Bob's point, they go out there and go, okay, when somebody says they want to cut your taxes, say, fine, that's great. But and Representative Reynolds and Representative Wesseloff are two of those examples. I've served with both of them for 7 years. They've been there longer than I have. But the 7 years I've been there, they're very adamant about it. That position is consistent. But then if you went up to them and said, well, where are you going to be on this fee increase or that fee increase? They vote no. Right? No, I'm not doing that, because they see it as a hypocritical position to vote yes on one and yes on the other, right? Lower your taxes, raise your fees, or on bond issues. But you get a lot of folks who don't do that. And you hear people, oh, well, this is requested by the Wildlife Department, or oh, this is requested by ODOT, or oh, this is requested. Well, so, sure it is, because they want more money to grow what they do, right? And you've got folks that are not only voting for it but carrying that legislation, and that ought to be really frustrating to you. So, and as for the cultural center, you asked, I got to answer the question. I don't know. Paul, you want to take this? This is where I do that, right? Hey, great. Okay. I'm going to navigate the landmines. No, so, and the cultural center is one that, if you believe it ought to be done, and the vast majority of the people at the state capitol think that the way it happened, I'm one who believes that the way the process was created was flawed. I feel like my hands are tied at this point. They've got steel in the air. Somebody cut a deal, made a decision decades ago or whenever it was. And the process just wasn't the best process to get us there. Now I feel like I'm there. My hands are kind of tied. Well, what are you going to do? You're going to take all these millions and leave it there? So you have a lot of folks who, sort of in my position, say, well, we have to find a way to finish it. That's my position. We have to find a way to finish it. I don't want to see us wasted. Other folks may say, tear it down, move on. And I can have that discussion with them. I don't have a problem with it. But I'm giving you my opinion. I believe we need to find a way to finish it. But how you finish it is a significant point of discussion. Do you go out with a bunch of bond issues and pay for it that way? Do you go out with, you just dip into the treasury and write a big check and pay for it that way? How do you do it? You do public-private dollars. There's all kinds of ways to do it. And for the last 2 years, the big bond issue was discussed as the way to get it done. And the votes weren't there to get that done. So the bond issue didn't pass in the Senate. In fact, it failed by 1 vote in the state Senate. And so then last year, it was a big discussion. Well, okay, now we're just going to maybe write the check. There was legislation, sort of a new revolving fund, like a maintenance revolving fund that was created, and $30 million was put into that maintenance revolving fund. And that money, odds are, was going to go to help finish the cultural center. When you asked people that question, we were told, no, that money's not going there. But in reality, that's where that money was going to go. Well, when the light was shown on it right towards the end of the session, they began to scramble and said, oh my goodness, we can't play the games anymore and can't hide it over here and hope it gets around over there. So they said we have to find another solution. So they came out with a solution of saying, well, instead of doing it that way, which they still deny to this day, if the speaker were standing here, I know what he'd say. He'd say, no, that's not true. Inman's wrong. He's telling the stories. I'm telling you, my gut, that's what that $30 million was for. Because for the first time in my 7 years, there was no discussion of the cultural center at the state capitol. For the first 6 years, people were all over that bill. Finish it, finish it, finish it, finish it, finish it. This year, dead silent. Why? In my opinion, because they figured out a way to do it, right? A quiet way to do it. Well, once that was discovered, they said, no, okay, we can't do that. That would look ugly if over the summer, all of a sudden, $25 million got dropped into the cultural center through this fund that we said, oh, by the way, wasn't going to be used for the cultural. So they came up with a new idea. They said, okay, we're going to dedicate next year's budget, not this year's budget, next year's budget, and the year after that's budget, $40 million a pop for the next 2 years. $80 million to not only finish the cultural center, but also do the Tulsa Pops Museum. The museum wanted to do in Tulsa. Yeah. So that's what they wanted. That's what they wanted to do with that money. And I got upset because a lot of the members of my caucus, I've said it before, I support completing the cultural center. And a lot of members of my caucus, the vast majority, support completing the cultural center. Let's get it done. That's where our team is. There's probably split in the Republican caucus. About half of them say let's finish it, the other half probably say no. But nevertheless, that's where my team is. But even my team, I went into my team and I said, I'm going to ask you, as your leader, to vote no on the bill when it comes into A and B. I asked all my A and B members, my appropriation budget folks, I said, I'm going to ask you to vote no on the bill. Vote no on the completion of the cultural center this way. I said, I respect what they're trying to do. I respect the completion of the project. I said, but when we stood up and said we needed to find money for DPS, right? $7 million is what we asked for to put money into state troopers for public safety, which I core function of government, right? We can get into discussions and all, but I believe public safety is a core function of government. And so we had bipartisan support. Find me $7 million to take care of the state troopers. For crying out loud, do it now. They're within a year of having about 225, they're already 200, they're able to have about 900 state troopers. That's what they're allotted to be able to have. Right now they got a little over 700 of them. So there's about 200 that they don't have filled. And of the 700 that they have, about 225 are eligible to retire in the next 2 years. So they can all hang it up to them out of here. And think of what that looks like, maybe not around here, but if you live in rural Oklahoma, think about what that looks like, right, without having state troopers. So we hollered and cussed and fussed and said, find $7 million for state troopers. And said, no, we're not doing it. We can't do it. We're not doing it. The money's not there. Oh, woe is me. I mean, it was all, they were just crying crocodile tears. Can't find what we want to. All session long, can't find $7 million. And in the last week or so of session, they go, oh, but there's $80 million that we can put into this cultural center and into and I told my guys, I said, you can't justify that. You can't go back home, especially guys from rural Oklahoma. I'm from Oklahoma City, Del City, right? I said, you can't go back home into rural Oklahoma when those state troopers are struggling like they are. Look them in the eye and say, we couldn't find $7 million to bring more state troopers down here, but I could find $40 million for a project in Oklahoma City and $40 million for a project in Tulsa. Couldn't do that. And I asked them, I said, humbly, please vote no. And it was a tough vote for me because many of our members had committed to completing the project. But the way it was done, the last second deal that was done, the fact that it wasn't going to be done until next year, I said, if it's so dadgum important, then do it next year. It's not even taking care of this year's money, do it next year. And so it passed by a vote. And because it only passed by one vote in that committee, because a bunch of Republicans voted with all my Democrats to vote no, it still only passed by one vote. With that one vote margin, they knew that the Pops Museum in Tulsa couldn't get passed because there are other Republicans who may have voted for the cultural center but weren't voting for Pops. Okay, and so they knew that bill was dead, and so they just pulled the Pops bill. And because the Pops bill got pulled, Senator Beaman, being a Sepulpa Tulsa guy, being very, very supportive of that Pops center, knowing that the Pops Museum probably won't get built if they bifurcate it and separate away from the cultural center. If they basically have to have both of them to pass together, right? So if you guys want the cultural center, you got to give me Pops. That's the way this negotiation has gone on for years now. Because the Pops Museum wasn't going to pass in the House A and B committee, they basically held both of them over and nothing got done this year. We'll see where we are this coming next year. So sorry about that long.
No, that's actually you answered that question very thoroughly because that was going to be one of my kind of backup questions regarding the culture center. Do you actually believe that culture center will never get built without the support of the Pops Museum in Tulsa?
No, absolutely. Matter of fact, I think if they broke Pops off, if they just let Pops die on the vine, the cultural center would pass, Pops wouldn't pass, and it'd be done. You don't have to have Pops to get culture, but you have to have culture to get Pops. That's their conventional thinking at the Capitol.
Thank you. Question?
Scott again. I've talked with Senator Justice, Senator Lovelace, and Representative Osborne at different times. And what I understand is that the Indian Cultural Museum, when they first brought the subject up, the federal government was going to put so much money into it also.
Okay.
And then when they finally broke ground, the federal government backed off and said, no, we don't have the money to do it.
Okay.
But the people that they hired to run the project before the ground was ever broke were getting paid. CEO and all the secretaries and stuff like this were already on the books getting paid tremendous amount of money when they hadn't broke ground. Then they said, okay, we need to get so much money from the state to add to it. And the state said, well, you came to us once and we gave you 25 or 30 million, something like that. And now you want more? And that's what it is, back and forth, back and forth. You have any ideas on that, or?
The federal government side of things is not something that I know a whole lot about. I mean, this thing started a long time ago, while I was still in high school, I think. But, so I can't answer that, to be very honest. Mike might know better understanding, have better understanding of that, and Lovelace probably does. I know it's in his district, and so he's focused on it pretty acutely. So, but in terms of yeah, certain promises were made, and then they were delivered. Like certain private entity groups said, oh, we'll put up X amount of dollars if the state will do this or that, and and then those promises would get broken. Not so much on the private side, usually it's the state side, and it's a mess. I don't know. I mean,
when they were saying we could get so much money from these different individuals to,
yeah, and that money,
and then they fell through.
No, to my understanding, that money's still there. I mean, from some of the tribes that put in some money, and guys like Clay Bennett and McClendon and Larry Nichols and all those big boys that have a lot of money, they've ponied up some of that money, and it's sitting there. But the way it's going to work is at least the way they've told it, is that they're not going to write their check unless the state puts up their 40 million or whatever it is, right? So that's the way it's worked. So technically speaking, has the money been pulled away? No, although they have said, they've used this as a big kind of a weight over our heads. If you don't pass it now, that money, that private money is going to go away. They've got to commit it for X number of years or whatever it is, and that money's going to go away, so you got to pass it now. That's been used as a leverage point for a long time, but every year they say that, and that money's still there. I mean, those commitments are still on the vine.
Question. On the cultural center and the POPs thing in Tulsa,
Sir.
if you put them on the same bill, doesn't that violate the law?
No, you're absolutely. Matter of fact, that was part of several years ago. The big discussion was they were going to do a bond proposal, and the bond proposal was going to have both of them in it, because they know, just like I've said, you can't get POPs without the cultural center. That's what they believe, right? And so that's what they were going to do. But they knew if they put them on the same bill, then it would be ruled unconstitutional. So what happens now is those two bills, wherever they go, it's like the big brother and little brother. They follow each other, right? So when they're brought up in committee, it's one then the other, one then the other. And that way everybody in the room knows, we're going to pass this, we're going to pass that. They don't like call it the cultural center today, and then 3 weeks from now call it the Pops Museum. That's not how it works. Those things run neck and neck through the process. Don't you love government? The government's wonderful, isn't it? Question, legislative process.
My name's Doug. How do you think this cultural center should be funded?
I'm not the biggest fan of bond issues. I think if you're going to do it, if you say you're going to do it, it should have been done primarily with private dollars. That's what it should have been done originally. Okay, but in the process, this is where I say my hands feel like we're tied. Because in the process, the way the agreements were done, the way the private dollars were contributed, there was a commitment made by the state. People who weren't there, Mike and I, Paul, Mike, we weren't there when this commitment was made. But a commitment was made to these donors. If you'll put up X amount, then the state will match certain amount. So that's the way the commitment was done. And I think Oklahoma has an obligation to finish their commitment. I would rather see us find the resources, if possible, write the check and get it done instead of going through a bond proposal or something like this. That is the best of the worst solutions. I mean, so that's my 2 cents, and there's probably 100 over here that go, he's crazy, we shouldn't finish it at all, and I respect that, because trust me, I can empathize with that position.
Question.
David, you keep forgetting the option on the Indian Culture Center is just put it up for sale and cut the losses. That's what it should be. No one's talking about that. Now, what you also need, I want to know is your opinion of the size and scope of government. Is it too big, just right, or too small? To me, the size and scope of government is way too big.
Yeah.
It should be.
If you look at government as a whole, this is just a philosophical question. You're looking at the federal government, you're looking at the state government, what? I think it's easy to say that there's probably too much government in a variety of areas. But when you break it down to the lower level, do we have too many state troopers on the road? No. Okay? I don't think so. And so I think government as it pertains to that issue is too small. And so on the whole, if you just want to talk in some sort of 30,000 feet opinion of where state government is, are we wasting money in some areas? And yes, absolutely. Absolutely. 100% agree with you. But then when you get down to the way, down to the actual nuts and bolts of, well, what do you think about this project? Well, that project ought to go, but we ought to put some of that money over here. So it's I'm not big in coloring everything with the same broad brush. I'd like to go in and say, let's determine each issue. Where are we on DHS? DHS is too big. It needed to be broken up, in my opinion. It was just too cumbersome. It's not that government entity was not taking care of children and senior citizens like it should have. It just was not functioning appropriately. You get over to public safety and DPS. I think we could stand for a little more money there. That's just me. But thanks for the question.
Okay, David, hold on. David, we can't hear. The rest of the people can't hear. Don't do that.
Pops and the Indian Culture Center should have never been funded, period.
Okay.
And this Pops thing should never even be considered any bit the scope of government.
I don't disagree. I don't think those are not core functions of government. And the way I handle things, the way I look at our budget, and the way we discuss things in our caucus, primarily we start with what we think are the most important functions of government: public safety, transportation, roads and bridges, getting people where they got to go. In my opinion, education is important. We can't be a functioning society without good public schools. And so those are, in my opinion, are the three most important functions of government: public safety, transportation, and education. And I think if you looked at those, if you've driven on a road, you've been to rural Oklahoma, and seen some of the products we have in some of our schools, we're significantly lacking in terms of all three of those areas.
Which is another kind of follow up with your answer there. Remember this too, in the Oklahoma Constitution, the core function of government is common ed. I mean, that is,
right.
We've got a mandate by our Constitution to fund education. So that is definitely a core function of government. Let me kind of just do a real quick poll here, real quick. Who disagrees with Scott's appraisal of what the three functions of government ought to be in this room? If you agree with him, would you raise your hand?
What are the three?
Public safety, transportation, and public education.
If you disagree with that, would you please raise your hand? And what I would like to do is just kind of speak up, just kind of make it, what would be one of the other ones that you would think that are more important than those three?
Public funded.
Okay, let me get this mic.
My name's Jim. Public funded education is unconstitutional.
Okay, well, I respect that position. I think as an attorney, I could walk through it, whether using the state constitution, as Bob pointed out, and say that that's not necessarily an accurate statement. I think if you want to get on the federal level, and talk about the federal Department of Education and where the federal money ought to be used, I think that you can have a legitimate discussion there as to whether federal tax dollars ought to be used for. Because I've read the 27 amendments in the Bill of Rights, right? I've read that, so I'm with you there. But at the state level, we have an obligation, a constitutional obligation to educate children. And I'll be honest with you, I don't want to live in a state. I don't want to live in a state where you got to have enough. You got to be wealthy in order to educate your children. Because I don't think that's good for Oklahoma. I just don't.
But I want to hear. Okay, now I want to hear a couple other comments. What do you think that are three of the more popular that you would think? Is there any difference there? What would some other ones be? Okay. All right. Let's move on to the next question.
Oh, this is it here. Yeah.
Conservatives and, well, most people really believe that voter fraud is a very serious threat to our republic. I mean, it is nationally, I believe it's a huge problem.
Sure.
You don't hear much about it here, but I believe there is probably occurs here protecting the nationwide.
Okay.
And, progressives say that an ID with a photo on it,
sure,
that's just too difficult for the poor and the elderly.
Sure.
I just don't believe that at all. And you've been on record as being against a voter ID.
Yes, sir.
Voter. I'd like to know why.
Sure. I voted against establishing a voter ID when it came to the Oklahoma House. I voted for putting it on the ballot to let people vote on it and make their decision. So that's where I am officially. The reason I did, and everybody will say all the time, is, well, you got to have a driver's license to cash a check, you got to have whatever. I believe that voting is a fundamental right. Okay? Fundamental right, constitutionally protected right. And because of that, the way our Constitution works is if you're going to put impediments to exercising that constitutional right, it's got to rise to the level. You've got to meet strict scrutiny and demonstrate to me that it's absolutely necessary in order to protect that constitutional right. Now, I think those who say we've got to worry about voter fraud, right? Those folks who show up at the polls committing voter fraud, I think you're evident. And matter of fact, I can just ask you, go look up the evidence. You give me a spreadsheet of all the incidents in which you've had voter fraud at the actual voter booth, and it's very, very small. Nationwide, it's very small. But where in Oklahoma, if you want to talk about taking care of voter fraud and preventing voter fraud, what I think you need to look at is our absentee ballot system. Right now, ballots go out, you have no idea who fills it out. You have no idea when they walk into the nursing home if that's the person that's actually doing it, or if they're making that decision for that senior citizen or not. You have no clue. And the legislation that we've done in the last few years has done zero to affect that. And so, certainly, I think the folks had a right to say what they wanted to say. My opinion was, because it's a constitutionally protected right, and I saw a lack of evidence to demonstrate that there was a great deal of abuse, I thought the way to really protect voter fraud was to do it in another manner. That's who I am, and that's what I stood for, but the voters of Oklahoma disagree with me, which is nothing new. And so there it is. So that's my position.
Question?
Speaking of fundamental rights,
Yes, ma'am.
would you support legislation that would protect parents' fundamental right to direct the upbringing and education of their children in the state?
You talking about homeschooling? Or what?
All schooling. But where parents get to make the decisions on what is best for their children.
Absolutely. I mean, my brother-in-law and sister-in-law live in Stillwater. They have 6 children. They homeschool all 6 of their children. And even though I'm the biggest proponent you'll ever find for public education, I wouldn't be here where I am today, wearing this nice suit, talking like this, and being able to complete sentences if it weren't for the public school system. My mother and dad never made any money, hardly, still don't. My dad worked on copiers for a living. That's what he did, come home every day with black gunk underneath his fingers, and he's hurt, his back was aching all the time, and he looked me in the eye. True story, I'm not doing this to be hyperbolic or to be tug on your heartstrings, true story. He looked at me, he'd sit on that couch, and he'd say, son, whatever you do, get an education. He goes, I didn't care about an education, I didn't take it seriously, and because of that, I cut up and messed around, and now I'm doing this job that I don't want to do. I wish I could do something else and make more money for my family, but I can't get an education. So he kicked me in the tail, and public school teachers got me where I am, and without that, I wouldn't be here. So that's true, because my parents, I couldn't have gone to Heritage Hall, okay? Now, should you as a parent have a right to say how your children are educated? Absolutely. Whether that's homeschooling, I'm a firm believer in your ability to do that, whether that's using private schools, certainly your right to do that. I'm a big believer in, I know that in Middell, the 5 people who sit on our school board, all of them had children. They're all parents. And they all had children in the Middell school system at one point or another. And so in that sense, you have parents kind of controlling what our curriculum is in Middell. I think that's very important. But you may be asking for some other level of parental involvement that I'm unaware of. So if you would...
What about Baptist?
I'm not a voucher guy. I'm not a voucher guy. I'm just not. So I came here. This is nothing new. I sat here next to John Lee Lewis and Jason Nelson and made my case for that. I mean, I don't believe that using public tax dollars to pay for private schools is the way to go. And the reason is because the evidence isn't there. The evidence is not there to demonstrate that works. I can show it to you. I've got the evidence in my office. I can give the schools that suffer the most, sir. John Marshall, Douglas High School, right? Those schools suffer not because those kids don't have enough money to go to private school. Those schools suffer because those kids live in apartments that are Section 8 and there's guns and violence and drugs and there's no mother or dad to kick them in the butt and say, go get your work done. Those kids suffer for that reason. And my fundamental belief is that if you're going to give that kid a voucher and say, now, if you can get into Cassidy, good luck, because Cassidy doesn't have to take everybody, right? If you can get your tail into Cassidy, congratulations. But you put that kid into Cassidy, and his grades are going to go up maybe by about that much. Because when he goes home every night, that same existence is there, and he's still worried about his life, still worried about where his next meal is going to come from, and still doesn't know who his daddy is. And as long as that exists, no voucher, in my opinion, will ever solve that problem. And that's my fundamental belief. And so,
let's let her do a little follow-up question.
You bet, please.
Okay, well, to clarify that, an example would be, do you support parents being able to opt their children out of curriculum or particular courses that they find objectionable on either religious or whatever basis that they need for their children?
Absolutely. If your child is sitting in a classroom and being taught something that you're not comfortable with, then you should never be forced to have it. Never.
Next one.
Reed, Dell City Class 1961.
All right, go Eagles.
Go Eagles.
That's right.
The cultural center, if it's ever built, will it cash flow?
I don't know. I mean,
operating can be a lot more expensive.
We've been told that it will, and I've got to believe that it will. I mean, it'd be a huge draw, but I don't have any evidence to demonstrate that it will. I have no idea.
Well, I was talking with the chamber, Mark Van Landingham, and they don't think it'll cash flow even if it's built.
It's going to be tough. Thank you, sir. We've got a couple more that and Mary Ann's going to drag me out of here in a minute, but go ahead.
Yeah, Nathan, I have one quick question. As far as core functions of government, where do you stand on mandatory health insurance and health coverage, specifically
Sure.
Obamacare and all this
Sure.
stuff.
I go back, I'm a student of history, and I go back to 1993, when then President Clinton and then First Lady Hillary Clinton decided that they were going to do universal health care. And they put together a health care plan that they thought would be best for everybody. They called it Hillary Care, not unlike Obamacare. They put together a plan that they thought would be best for everybody. Well, at the time, the Republican majority, they weren't the majority at the time, the Republicans put together their plan, right? 94 came with Newt Gingrich and the contract with America and changed American history. But at the time, 1993, 1994, the Republican Party put together their plan to counter that plan, okay? Their plan, authored by Senator Don Nichols, look it up, Senator Don Nichols, our United States Senator. Their plan was an individual mandate to purchase health insurance. The Heritage Foundation wrote it, Don Nichols authored the legislation. 1993, 1994. Don Nichols, Heritage Foundation, the entire Republican Senate operation was behind an individual mandate. The idea being that if you are capable of purchasing health insurance and you choose not to, okay, and then you go get yourself in a car accident and they haul you into the hospital, why in the world should my tax dollars pay for your refusal to cover yourself like everybody else does? Okay? That's the idea, that individual mandate. That's what, it's just like auto insurance. We mandate people buy auto insurance so that if you hit me, I don't care if you cover yourself, but if you hit me, my tax dollars or my own personal dollars aren't going to have to pay to repair that car. That's the fundamental principle. And in my opinion, when it comes to health insurance, when you have about 600,000 Oklahomans in the state, not all of them can afford it, most can. I mean, let's be honest, a lot of folks are poor and can't afford to pay for it. Otherwise, they would probably have it. But when you take a segment of the population, between 100 to 200,000 people who can afford health insurance, and they choose not to, then what they do is when they get sick, they go to the emergency room, which is the most expensive form of health care in the state. And when they can't pay, because they can't, when they can't pay, then you and I pay. Right now in Oklahoma, on average, our hospital system takes on about $600 million a year in uncompensated care. You and I, who have insurance and who pay our bills, take on about $600 million a year in uncompensated care. And I think that's a travesty. And so what the individual mandate does, not getting into all the other details of Obamacare, because I don't know all the details and there's things that I disagree with. Okay, I'll state that. I wasn't for the whole package. How it all went down, I'm not going to stand here and defend it or support it, because that's not what I'm here for. But as you asked specifically about the individual mandate. When it comes to the individual mandate, if you can afford it, you ought to pay for it. Otherwise, then let's set up a system that says this. And this is much more draconian. Okay? Otherwise, to set up a system that says this. Here's the deal. If you can afford health insurance, you've got a good job, paying, you get sick and you come to the emergency room doesn't have to cover you. Right? When you do that, right? That's pretty draconian. That's the alternative. And so it's like, go then. So you either have to say go, or if you have to care for them, which is Ronald Reagan's bill. Ronald Reagan, President of the United States, signed it into law. Says that all hospitals have to take care of people when they come in. Emergency room care, guaranteed under Ronald Reagan. Okay? Facts are facts. Ronald Reagan, Don Nichols. Guaranteed care, individual mandate by Don Nichols. Said you've got to take care of them. If we're going to mandate that they take care of them under President Reagan and under our current state laws and federal laws, then my opinion is if you can afford to pay for it, don't be lazy, go pay for it. That's just my opinion. Otherwise, don't come asking me to pay for it. So how do you get there? I don't know. I think in another time, I think Obama and his policies and the way he went about it was very controversial, and everything in that bill, there were a lot of things that a lot of people didn't like, and so a lot of things got locked up in that. But I think if Don Nichols had had his way in 1994, and the Heritage Foundation had their way in 1994, and we had an individual mandate today, I think most everybody in the room probably would have supported it at that time. But when you tag it into this environment, it's ugly and nasty in Washington. It's a dysfunctional system, and so everything has this taint on it. And I think that colors our decision. But it's probably not popular here, but that's my opinion. Thank you.
Scott Inman,
yes.
Thank you very much for coming behind
Thank you all
You are now an official member of High Noon Club.
I appreciate it.
So at the Capitol, you're known as a High Noon.
All right.
Thanks, buddy.
Thanks.
Talk to you later. Bye.